This video was brought to you by Brilliant. Last week, the United States announced that they were taking Apple to court, accusing them of creating an illegal monopoly around the iPhone. That's a pretty big claim, so let's unpack the 5 major issues coming out of the complaint, and why some experts say that the case is actually more convincing than they expected. Essentially, the 88-page complaint argues that Apple has done a number of things in order to make consumers and developers more reliant on their ecosystem, which combined gives consumers worse, more expensive products, which are so well protected that it would be super hard to walk away from Apple even if they wanted to. So let's focus in on those 5 main complaints: super apps, cloud streaming services, green bubbles, smartwatches, and digital wallets. In order to keep this quick, let's put a timer on screen and spend no more than 90 seconds on each topic. Ready? Well, let's go. The first is super apps. Super apps essentially allow you to do a whole bunch of things in one app, and they're super popular in Asia, where apps like WeChat allow you to do an unbelievable number of things. As such, super apps often become the most important part of your smartphone, meaning that as long as you can access the app, you're all good. The complaint argues that Apple has limited access to apps like these in the US because they see them as fundamentally disruptive to existing app distribution and development paradigms. And as a result, if they were to be successful, demand for the iPhone would be reduced. That's because if all you care about is the super app, then the rest of the phone becomes less important, and switching devices becomes easier. In fact, the complaint specifically says that Apple saw this exact problem occur in Asia, describing super apps as a major headwind, and complaining about the fact that super apps reduce stickiness and the switching cost for the iPhone in these markets. As such, they allege that Apple uses App Store rules to effectively make starting US-based super apps far more difficult, and even limiting existing super apps in markets like Asia. The next complaint is focused around cloud streaming apps, and more specifically, cloud game streaming apps. If you're not familiar, game streaming apps allow you to play video games over the cloud, which means that you don't need a super powerful device. You can just play virtually on a powerful server. Now, this might be desirable for users, but not for Apple, because if you don't need a powerful device, then in the words of an Apple exec, you could just buy a Android for $25 at a garage sale and have a solid cloud computing device that works fine. Now, that's good for you and for companies trying to sell high-performance games, but it's bad for Apple's ability to upsell powerful hardware. Not only that, but it could also prevent Apple from being able to take a cut of every game sale made through the App Store. The complaint argues that Apple is actively preventing cloud gaming by wielding its power over app distribution to effectively prevent third-party developers from offering cloud gaming subscription services as a native app on the iPhone. The best example of this is that Apple requires cloud streaming services to get approval for every update in every game from Apple, which for major titles is incredibly difficult. They also note that Apple requires payments to run through their systems and requires redesigns specifically for iOS, all of which make the process far more arduous. Now, their next complaint is all about iMessage and green bubbles. We don't have time to get into the whole green bubble issue here, but essentially the complaint argues that not only does Apple stigmatize non-iPhone users through its messaging platform, but also unnecessarily holds back functionality. They use examples like WhatsApp, Messenger, and Signal, all of which use proprietary protocols, but which still allow universal cross-platform, fully functional access. Now, they argue that Apple is doing this to lock people into iMessage, especially in the US, where it's very common for a lot of communication to be handled via the service, making it harder to step away for fear of a worse service and upsetting those you communicate with. They also allege that as a result of these actions, Apple have knowingly and deliberately degraded quality, privacy, and security for its users. Now, there's a lot of detail in this complaint about the technical standards and actions that Apple have implemented to further this lock-in, with them using various quotes from executives to prove that Apple knows this lock-in factor is very effective, as well as specifically referring to this quote from Tim Cook.
How do you think Steve would feel currently about the state of communication, specifically between people who aren't within the community of Apple? Not to make it personal, but I can't send my mom certain videos, or she can't send me certain videos. And so we leave her
Buy your mom an iPhone.
The penultimate claim is focused around smartwatches. In this, the complaint alleges that Apple uses its watch to lock in consumers. They say that having copied the idea of smartwatches from third-party developers, Apple now prevents those developers from innovating and limits the Apple Watch to the iPhone to prevent a negative impact to iPhone sales. Essentially, because the Apple Watch is only compatible with iPhones, the fact that you've bought an expensive watch makes it far harder for you to step away from the Apple ecosystem. In fact, they know this, with one executive remarking that the watch may help prevent iPhone customers from switching, and surveys reaching the same conclusion. Not only that, they argue that iOS actively makes third-party watches worse in a number of ways in order to make the Apple Watch the only viable option. Again, something that other platforms like Google Wear doesn't do. Now, the final complaint surrounds digital wallets. In this, the DOJ argues that Apple uses its control to effectively block third-party developers from creating digital wallets on the iPhone with tap-to-pay functionality, and that, as a result, Apple maintains complete control. The complaint actually goes into some detail about how Apple's approach to digital wallets makes life worse for consumers, and how cross-platform wallets would offer an easier, more seamless, and potentially more secure way for users to switch from the iPhone to another smartphone. They also complain that because, unlike Android, Apple only allows Apple Wallet to integrate with NFC, they've artificially inserted themselves as a middleman, able to collect information about users and charge banks for this access. Where Android's free NFC system allows competition and thus no processing fees, Apple charges banks 0.15% for all Apple Pay transactions. Transactions worth nearly $200 billion in the US in 2022 alone. Essentially then, the complaint argues that Apple artificially limits the market, not only allowing them to act as a middleman, but also stifling innovation, as everything has to run through Apple Wallet. So that's what the case alleges, but will it actually be successful? Well, some are certainly impressed. Speaking to The Verge, Rebecca Hall-Allensworth of the Vanderbilt Law School remarked that they made an even stronger case than I thought they would, going on to remark that they told a very coherent story about how Apple is making its product, the iPhone, and the products on it, the apps, less useful for consumers in the name of maintaining their dominance. Former FTC Chair William Kovacic also agrees that the complaint is well written, remarking that they'd learned from previous cases and provided important additional context. What's clear though is that the DOJ is keen on painting a very broad picture, looking not at specific actions, but at how Apple's conduct across the board has harmed consumers and dampened competition. This attempt to highlight an interlocking trend of illegal behaviors may well be more successful than previous attempts, showing that combined, these efforts have stifled competition and allowed Apple to push up prices by making it unnecessarily and illegally hard for other companies to compete. This doesn't mean that the DOJ will be successful though. Many will defend Apple's right to design their products however they want, and argue that they're just vertically integrating to make the best products they can. However, the DOJ clearly argues that they can't just do whatever they want, and that they're actually lying when they say that they're just making the best decisions for their customers. And this is potentially best evidenced by the iMessage issue, where Apple is actively taking away features and knowingly gatekeeping the product to iOS in order to lock people in. However, the problem is that even in their case, the US admits that Apple controls just 65% of the smartphone market and 70% of what they describe as the performance smartphone market. Now, that's a lot of devices for sure, but it's not necessarily a monopoly even under that tighter definition, especially as Apple will point out its even lower global standing. Now, Apple certainly might do some things you don't like, but if these are monopolistic depends on your stance on these factors, and if Apple does indeed have a monopoly. Both of those things are still up in the air. Now, understanding what exactly is going to happen here is a little tricky, requiring you to evaluate a lot of different information from often partial sources. It'll be sensible then to begin improving your own critical thinking skills so that you can stay sharp and better understand what's going on. And, well, our sponsor, Brilliant.org, can help you do exactly that. Brilliant is the online learning platform that's designed specifically to teach you everything from maths, data analysis, programming, and AI from the ground up. You don't need a fancy degree or to have dedicated hundreds of hours to studying any of these topics. All you need is a device with an internet connection and a spare few minutes a day. And with those few minutes, you'll be learning by actually doing. Because Brilliant allows you hands-on lessons that allow you to play around with concepts, a method that has been shown to be 6 times more effective than just watching lectures. What makes this even better is that this content is created by an award-winning team of teachers, researchers, and professionals from MIT, Caltech, Duke, Microsoft, and more. You can try everything that Brilliant has to offer for free for a full 30 days by clicking the link in the description. That way, you'll also get 20% off an annual premium subscription.